What if I told you that in May 1945, a German submarine surrendered to American forces carrying 560 kilograms of uranium oxide, advanced jet aircraft blueprints, infrared fuses, and two Japanese officers who committed suicide rather than be captured? That this U-boat's cargo, including enough enriched uranium to potentially build an atomic bomb, was racing toward Japan when Germany surrendered, and its capture may have accelerated the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. That American intelligence discovered the submarine was part of a desperate Nazi plan to share atomic weapons technology with Japan in a last-ditch alliance that could have extended World War II for years? This is the story of U-234, the Nazi submarine that carried Hitler's final technological secrets across the Atlantic, and the cargo so dangerous that its existence was classified for decades. And the darkest part? We still don't know if this was Germany's only attempt to deliver atomic materials to Japan. March 1945. Nazi Germany is collapsing. Soviet forces are fighting in the streets of Berlin. American and British forces have crossed the Rhine and are racing through Western Germany. The war in Europe is clearly ending, not in months, but in weeks. In this chaos, with the thousand-year Reich dying around them, German military and intelligence officials are making desperate calculations about what can be saved, what can be hidden, and what can be transferred to allies who might still use it. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan had been allies since the Tripartite Pact of 1940. They'd shared military intelligence, coordinated strategy loosely, and supported each other diplomatically. But the relationship was always strained. Geographic separation meant limited practical cooperation, and both nations prioritized their own strategic interests. Now, with Germany facing imminent defeat, the relationship took on new urgency. Japan was still fighting, the Pacific War wasn't over, and Germany possessed technology, advanced weapons designs, jet aircraft, revolutionary submarine capabilities, and most critically, atomic research that Japan desperately wanted. The problem was delivery. By March 1945, Allied naval and air forces controlled the Atlantic. Surface ships couldn't break through. Aircraft couldn't make the journey. The only way to transfer technology and materials from Germany to Japan was by submarine, specifically by the large, long-range Type 9D U-boats designed for extended missions. U-234 was selected for this mission. The submarine was a Type XB, an even larger variant designed as a mine layer but converted for cargo transport. It was massive by submarine standards, 294 feet long, capable of staying at sea for months, and equipped with enough range to reach Japan without refueling. On March 25, 1945, U-234 departed from Kiel, Germany, under the command of Kapitänleutnant Johann Heinrich Fehler. Its destination, Japan. Its cargo, the Third Reich's final technological offerings to its distant ally. And its mission, to deliver materials and expertise that might enable Japan to continue fighting, even after Germany's surrender. U-234's cargo manifest, partially reconstructed from German and American records after the war, was extraordinary. The uranium. The most controversial element of the cargo was 560 kilograms of uranium oxide, contained in gold-lined cylinders and labeled for Japanese scientists. The uranium was reportedly partially enriched, not to weapons-grade levels, but processed beyond natural uranium ore. The exact enrichment level remains disputed among historians, as American records from the immediate post-war period are incomplete or contradictory. What's undisputed is that 560 kilograms of uranium, even at low enrichment, represented a substantial quantity of fissile material, more than enough to significantly advance a nuclear weapons program if Japan had the technical capability to further enrich it. The uranium was divided among multiple containers to distribute weight and reduce the risk of losing everything if one container was damaged. Advanced technology. Beyond the uranium, U-234 carried an extraordinary collection of advanced German military technology. Complete blueprints for the Me-262 jet fighter, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft, detailed designs for the Me-163 rocket-powered interceptor, infrared proximity fuses for anti-aircraft shells, technology that would allow shells to detonate near targets without direct hits, advanced optical equipment and fire control systems, technical documents on German rocketry, including V-2 components and design specifications, samples of advanced explosives and propellants, specialized tools and machinery for manufacturing jet engines. The passengers, U-234, carried 12 passengers in addition to its crew of approximately 48 submariners, two Japanese naval officers, Lieutenant Commander Hideo Tomonaga, a submarine specialist, and Lieutenant Commander Shoji Genzo, an aircraft specialist, both assigned to receive the technology and escort it to Japan. 10 German specialists, scientists, engineers, and military technicians who were supposed to help Japanese forces implement the transferred technology. The Japanese officers were critical to the mission. They would ensure the cargo reached appropriate Japanese authorities and provide expertise in utilizing the technology immediately upon arrival. The intent. Why was Germany sending this cargo to Japan? Several motivations likely combined. 1. Strategic delay. If Japan could develop more advanced weapons, it might prolong the Pacific War, potentially forcing the Allies to negotiate rather than demand unconditional surrender. 2. Ideological alliance. Nazi leadership believed in supporting fellow Axis powers, particularly one fighting the Western Allies and Soviet Union. Preservation. German scientists and officials knew Germany was defeated. Sending research and materials to Japan meant preserving their work and potentially ensuring it would eventually be used, even if Germany fell. 4. Bargaining. If Germany surrendered but Japan continued fighting with German technology, Germany might negotiate better post-war treatment by demonstrating continued strategic value to Japan. None of these motivations were purely altruistic. This was desperate realpolitik by a dying regime trying to salvage something from impending total defeat. U-234 departed Kiel on March 25, 1945, and immediately faced extraordinary challenges. The North Atlantic in 1945. By the final months of the war, the Atlantic had become a graveyard for U-boats. Allied anti-submarine warfare had reached devastating effectiveness. Long-range patrol aircraft covered vast ocean areas, detecting submarines on the surface. Escort carriers provided air support to convoy routes. Improved sonar and depth charges made submerged submarines vulnerable. Breaking German naval codes meant Allied forces often knew U-boat positions and routes. German U-boat losses were catastrophic. Hundreds had been sunk. Submariners called the Atlantic crossings suicide runs. U-234's route took it north around Britain, past Iceland, and across the North Atlantic toward the Caribbean, where it would transit to the Pacific via routes near South America. The journey was supposed to take several months. U-boats traveled slowly when submerged, and U-234 would spend most of the journey underwater to avoid Allied detection. Life aboard. Conditions aboard. U-234 were extraordinarily cramped. The submarine was packed with cargo, reducing living space to the absolute minimum. The crew and passengers lived in continuous proximity, breathing recycled air, eating preserved food, and enduring the constant psychological pressure of knowing they were hunted by Allied forces who would sink them without hesitation if detected. The Japanese officers struggled with the confinement. Submarine duty requires psychological adaptation to tight spaces, limited privacy, and complete dependence on machinery for survival. Neither officer had extensive submarine experience. They were aviation and naval specialists, not submariners. They reportedly spent much of the journey studying technical documents about the cargo they were escorting, preparing to explain the technology to Japanese authorities upon arrival. The war's end. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. U-234 received the news via radio while submerged in the mid-Atlantic, roughly halfway between Europe and the Caribbean. The crew and passengers faced an impossible decision. May 8, 1945. U-234 submerged in the Atlantic Ocean, several hundred miles from the nearest land. Captain Fehler gathered his officers and informed them of Germany's surrender. Grand Admiral Dönitz, Germany's head of state after Hitler's suicide, had ordered all U-boats to surface, cease hostilities, and surrender to the nearest Allied forces. Fehler faced multiple options. Option 1. Follow orders and surrender to Allied forces. This was the legal obligation under international law and military discipline. Germany had surrendered, and U-234 was now officially defeated. But surrendering meant delivering the uranium, technology, and Japanese officers to American or British forces. It meant the mission had failed completely. Option 2. Continue to Japan. The mission was to deliver the cargo to Japan. Japan was still fighting. The submarine had enough supplies to reach Japanese-controlled territory. Continuing meant violating surrender orders and potentially facing war crimes charges. It also meant continued danger from Allied anti-submarine forces. Option 3 scuttled the submarine. Some crew members reportedly argued for this option: sink the U-boat with its cargo, ensuring the technology didn't fall into Allied hands, then surrender as shipwrecked sailors. This would accomplish nothing positive but would prevent the uranium and technology from reaching anyone. Fehler consulted with his officers and the German passengers. The decision was ultimately his as commander, but he wanted consensus. The Japanese officers' position was clear. They insisted the submarine should continue to Japan. The mission was not Germany's anymore, it was Japan's. The cargo belonged to the Japanese Empire, and it should be delivered regardless of Germany's surrender. But Fehler and his officers understood reality. U-234 was isolated, hunted, and running out of time. Allied forces controlled the Atlantic. The chances of reaching Japan were minimal, and even if they made it, they'd be deserters from a defeated military, potentially facing execution if Germany's post-war government demanded their return. On May 14, 1945, Fehler made his decision. He would surface and surrender to American forces. On May 14th, U-234 surfaced in the Atlantic approximately 600 miles east of Cape Race, Newfoundland. Captain Fehler radioed Allied command, broadcasting in English. "This is German submarine U-234. We are surrendering to American forces. Request instructions for transfer of vessel and cargo." American naval intelligence was stunned. A German submarine surrendering this late was unusual. Most had surrendered immediately after May 7th. But more importantly, the submarine explicitly mentioned cargo. What cargo? The destroyer USS Sutton was dispatched to intercept U-234 and escort it to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire. But before the American vessel arrived, something tragic occurred aboard U-234. Lieutenant Commander Tominaga and Lieutenant Commander Genzo, the two Japanese officers, made a decision. Under Japanese military code, surrender was dishonorable. Capture meant interrogation, potentially revealing information about Japanese military capabilities and planning. The officers had been briefed on sensitive information about Japan's war effort and defensive preparations. Rather than face capture, both officers committed suicide. The method reported in American intelligence documents was an overdose of luminol, a barbiturate sedative carried aboard the submarine for medical purposes. Both officers took fatal doses, lost consciousness, and died before U-234 reached American custody. Their bodies were buried at sea by the German crew before the submarine reached port, a traditional naval burial that honored them as fallen warriors despite their suicide. The German crew and remaining passengers were taken into American custody when U-234 arrived at Portsmouth on May 19, 1945. American intelligence officers immediately boarded the submarine and began cataloging the cargo. What they found astonished and alarmed them. When American intelligence officers opened U-234's cargo holds, they discovered the uranium oxide cylinders almost immediately. The cylinders were clearly labeled. German documentation identified them as containing uranium oxide destined for Japanese scientists. The intelligence officers recognized the significance instantly. The Manhattan Project, America's atomic bomb program, was still highly classified in May 1945. Most Americans, including most military officers, had no idea atomic weapons were being developed. But the intelligence officers examining U-234's cargo had been briefed. They knew the United States was racing to develop an atomic bomb before Germany or Japan could. And here was evidence that Germany had been attempting to share atomic materials with Japan. The uranium was immediately seized and transported under heavy security to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, one of the Manhattan Project's primary facilities. The uranium's fate. What happened to the uranium from U-234 remains one of the most controversial aspects of the story. Official American records state the uranium was tested, found to be partially enriched but far below weapons grade, and incorporated into American atomic research stockpiles. But some historians and researchers have suggested something more dramatic, that the uranium from U-234 was further enriched at Oak Ridge and potentially incorporated into the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. This theory is based on the timing. U-234's uranium arrived in May 1945, and the Hiroshima bomb was dropped in August, potentially enough time for processing. The quantity, 560 kilograms of partially enriched uranium, represented a valuable addition to American stockpiles. The incomplete documentation, records of the uranium's processing, are fragmentary. However, most Manhattan Project historians dismiss this theory. The uranium recovered from U-234 was insufficient in quantity and enrichment level to significantly contribute to the bombs dropped on Japan. The American program had its own enrichment facilities producing weapons-grade uranium. The technology transfer, the advanced German technology discovered aboard U-234 was thoroughly documented and studied. Jet aircraft blueprints were analyzed by American aviation engineers and influenced post-war American jet development. Infrared fuses were tested and eventually incorporated into American weapon systems. Rocket technology documents were cross-referenced with materials captured from German Sowdivs II facilities. The German specialists aboard were interrogated extensively about their expertise. This technology transfer, forcibly captured rather than voluntarily shared, accelerated American post-war military development significantly. The interrogations. The German crew and passengers were interrogated separately and extensively. American intelligence wanted to know, what was Germany's atomic weapons research status when U-234 departed? Were other submarines carrying similar cargoes still at sea? What had Japan requested and what had Germany promised? What additional technology transfers had occurred before U-234's departure? The interrogations revealed disturbing information. U-234 was not a unique mission. Other submarines had carried technology and materials to Japan earlier in the war. Some had reached Japan successfully. Others had been sunk by Allied forces without anyone knowing what cargoes they carried. The full extent of German-Japanese technological cooperation would never be completely known. U-boats sunk in the Atlantic took their cargoes and secrets with them. The story of U-234 has generated controversy and speculation for decades. Question 1. How advanced was Germany's atomic program? The uranium aboard U-234 proves Germany had an active atomic research program and was enriching uranium to some degree. But how close was Germany to building an atomic bomb? Post-war interrogations of German scientists, including Werner Heisenberg, who led the German atomic program, revealed that Germany was significantly behind the Manhattan Project. The German program faced resource shortages, organizational problems, and was never given the industrial priority necessary to build a weapon. However, some researchers argue that Germany's program was more advanced than captured scientists admitted, that they deliberately downplayed their progress to avoid being seen as having supported atomic weapons development. The uranium aboard U-234 doesn't resolve this debate. It proves Germany was enriching uranium and willing to share it with Japan, but it doesn't prove Germany could have built a working atomic bomb. Question 2. What was Japan's atomic capability? Japan had its own atomic research program during World War II. Two separate programs actually, one run by the Army, NIGO Project, and one by the Navy, EFCO Project. Both programs were far behind the Manhattan Project and made limited progress due to resource shortages and Allied bombing of Japanese research facilities. But if Japan had received German uranium and expertise, could that have accelerated their program significantly? Most experts say no. Japan lacked the industrial infrastructure to enrich uranium to weapons grade, even with German assistance. But the possibility existed that German materials could have advanced Japanese research enough to develop some form of radiological weapon, even if not a true atomic bomb. Question 3. Did U-234's cargo contribute to the Hiroshima bomb? This remains hotly debated. The official position is no. The uranium was insufficiently enriched and insufficient in quantity to make a meaningful contribution to the Manhattan Project's weapons. But the timing is suggestive, and documentation is incomplete. The possibility cannot be entirely ruled out, though most historians consider it unlikely. Question 4. Were there other U-boats carrying similar cargoes? Almost certainly yes. German records and post-war interrogations indicate that multiple U-boats carried technology and materials to Japan throughout the war. Some succeeded in reaching Japanese-controlled ports. Others were sunk en route. U-234 was probably the last such mission, departing as Germany collapsed. But it wasn't the first or the only attempt. The full scope of German-Japanese technological cooperation via submarine will never be known. The Atlantic Ocean holds too many secrets. The story of U-234 raises profound questions about technology transfer, atomic weapons development, and the end of World War II. First, the timing question. U-234 departed Germany in late March 1945, when the war's outcome was already certain. Germany would be defeated within weeks. Why send such valuable cargo on a mission unlikely to succeed? This suggests either German leadership was delusional about the war's trajectory. The mission was primarily about preserving German research by transferring it to Japan, rather than letting it fall into Allied hands. German-Japanese cooperation was sufficiently strong that Germany felt obligated to fulfill commitments even as it collapsed. All three explanations likely contain some truth. Second, the ethical dimension. If Germany had successfully delivered atomic materials and expertise to Japan, and if Japan had developed atomic weapons as a result, the Pacific War could have been dramatically different. American forces were preparing for an invasion of the Japanese home islands, Operation Downfall, projected to cost hundreds of thousands of Allied casualties and millions of Japanese casualties. If Japan had possessed atomic weapons, even crude ones, the invasion would have been impossible. The war would have continued indefinitely or ended in negotiated settlement rather than unconditional surrender. From a German perspective, prolonging the Pacific War served their interests by occupying Allied resources. But from a humanitarian perspective, it would have caused enormous additional suffering. Third, the technology question. The advanced German technology aboard U-234, jet aircraft, infrared fuses, rocket designs, would have significantly enhanced Japanese military capability if it had been delivered and implemented. But if implemented is critical. Japan in 1945 lacked the industrial capacity to manufacture advanced weapons on a scale that would change the war's outcome. German technology would have been interesting but not decisive. This suggests the cargo's real value was post-war, preserving German research that could be used by whoever captured it. Fourth, the human tragedy. The suicide of the two Japanese officers reflects the tragic personal dimensions of military honor codes that valued death over capture. These were educated, skilled officers who could have contributed to post-war reconstruction. Instead, they died because their military culture demanded it. A waste of human potential in service of an honor code that valued appearance over life. Today, U-234 no longer exists. After its cargo was unloaded and its crew interrogated, the submarine was used for weapons testing and eventually scuttled. The uranium it carried, if it did contribute to the Manhattan Project, may have been transformed into atomic energy that destroyed Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Or it may have simply been incorporated into American research stockpiles and eventually used for peaceful nuclear energy. We'll never know with certainty. The documentation is incomplete. The people who knew are dead. The truth is somewhere in classified archives or lost entirely. What we do know is this. In the final days of the Third Reich, as Germany collapsed into ruin, Nazi officials made a desperate decision to share their most advanced technology with their distant ally Japan. They loaded a submarine with uranium, jet aircraft blueprints, and Japanese officers, and sent it across the Atlantic with orders to deliver the cargo regardless of Germany's fate. The submarine's captain, facing Germany's surrender, made the difficult decision to surrender rather than continue a hopeless mission. Two Japanese officers chose death over capture, preserving their honor as they understood it. And American intelligence officers discovered that Germany and Japan had been cooperating on atomic weapons research, a cooperation that, if successful, could have changed the war's outcome. U-234's cargo, especially the uranium, represents something deeply unsettling. The possibility that World War II could have ended very differently. If the submarine had reached Japan, if Japanese scientists had successfully utilized the uranium, if Japan had developed atomic weapons before the United States did. The history we know, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese surrender, the end of the war in August 1945, might not have happened. Instead, we might have seen atomic warfare between Japan and Allied forces, a prolonged invasion of Japan, millions of additional casualties, a radically different post-war world. U-234's surrender prevented that alternative history. Captain Failor's decision to follow surrender orders rather than continue to Japan may have been one of the most consequential individual decisions of the war's final days. At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, there are U-boats that never surfaced, never surrendered, and whose cargoes remain unknown. Were any of them carrying materials like U-234's? We'll never know. The ocean keeps its secrets. But U-234 reminds us that history's turning points sometimes come down to individual decisions. A submarine captain choosing surrender, officers choosing death, intelligence officers recognizing the significance of cylinders containing uranium oxide. Small moments, enormous consequences. If this story fascinated you, if it made you think about technology, war, and the thin line between history and alternative history, hit that subscribe button. The story of U-234 is mostly forgotten now. The submarine is gone. The uranium is unrecoverable. The Japanese officers are buried in the Atlantic. But the lesson remains. In war, the most dangerous weapons are sometimes the ones never used. And sometimes the greatest victories are the disasters that never happened.